It's the offensive line. It's not any more complicated than that, right? Oh, no. You're making a face. Why?
No,
Is it more than the offensive line?
I listened to the podcast.
All right.
And you guys are absolutely right. There's some issues up front. There's also some familiarity issues with the Jets, who they had just practiced against.
Jets have a really good defensive line.
They have a good defensive line. You're not going to show a bunch of stuff, which Frank Reich had mentioned. However, I've been very consistent in this point, and I would like to remain very consistent in this point. Bryce Young is not Patrick Mahomes. Bryce Young is not Lamar Jackson. Bryce Young is not even Trevor Lawrence.
Okay.
He is not what we typically think of as the overall number one pick. I think his ceiling is that of being a good player. You will not win football games because of Bryce Young. That's a hard thing to say and concept to realize and come to grips with when you're picked 1-1. And when you're the Panthers and you took Cam Newton 1-1 and you won WON football games because of Cam Newton. I think Bryce Young is a quarterback who is capable of leading you to the playoffs. I don't think he's a quarterback capable of winning the Super Bowl.
Then why'd they move up to take him number 1?
Because they were desperate to get a quarterback.
You could have gotten Anthony Richardson. You could have done the scratch off. You could have done CJ Stroud.
They could have, but given where they were and the problems that they had earlier under Tepper and his own kind of fidgetiness and anxiousness to get a quarterback, they weren't going to wait. And once they hired Frank Reich, after all of the roulette that Frank went through with the Colts in his 5 years, what you have to understand with Young, he doesn't pop. He doesn't make Lamar Jackson plays. Okay. Next level thinker. I think his accuracy is also going to be off the charts.
Yeah.
I loved his poise in this game, but one thing he's going to have to realize, this is another thing I've been consistent about. It's a little bit like when you play tennis, right? When you go out and play tennis and you're volleying with, if you were able to volley with a better player than you, that's going to raise your level, right? But when you're out there playing tennis against someone who can't move and can't hit the ball, you go down to their level. Bryce Young played at Alabama. Talked about this with James Smith-Williams on the Law of the Wolf podcast. When you're at Alabama, you got 10 other pros around you. You are also dominant against the other teams that you're playing. Dominant. You are not playing the same game. Now you get to the NFL, as we saw with Urban Meyer, there's a little bit of that too. We can mix all of my Gilio points here. Because when you get to the NFL, oh yeah, everybody's got one of those. All of a sudden you realize, hey, I don't have a distinct advantage over the other team. So what does he have to do? He's got to use his brain. He's got to work on that accuracy. Yes, the scheme is going to get more complicated and advanced for him to help him once the games become real. I'm not panicking over what he looked like or that didn't score points. What I'm saying to you, though, was pretty clear in that sample size. He will not be the reason you win football games. He will not pop the way that Lamar pops. He will not pop the way that a Patrick Mahomes pops. He does not have that physical tool set. If you'd like for me to whisper this part, or
how many Super Bowls does Lamar Jackson have?
But he pops and he wins games.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to get you a Super Bowl. I mean,
there's different ways to win the Super Bowl. I mean, Trent Dilfer won the Super Bowl.
Well, I mean, I'm not even going to put him on the Trent Dilfer way. I mean, what you're describing is what I would want in my quarterback: good decision making, getting the ball where you need it to be. And I'm pretty sure, as we've seen,
we have to see what those physical talents look like.
Well, that's why I'm not making too much of any sort of grand statements after one preseason game where Frank Reich even said, we showed you nothing.
Sure.
I'm disappointed in that the very vanilla way we ran things didn't produce anything, but we intentionally did not show you anything. And I thought the smartest thing he said at the end, after he took about 90 seconds to get there, was, yeah, man, I'm willing to take it on the chin a little bit in the preseason just to get some reps and get where we need to be and prepare for week one. So I'm going to push back on this idea that Bryce Young is not the kind of player that can win you a Super Bowl, because what you're describing are really incredibly talented players. One of them has won a Super Bowl, and one of them is a guy that you've dismissed all the way up until this last Super Bowl. So,
Mahomes?
Yeah.
No, he had already won one. I'm saying I wanted to see him win one without Tyreek Hill. I think you're missing the point here. I'm not basing my opinion of Bryce Young isn't based on one preseason game. It's what I saw at Alabama.
Okay.
There's guys who make plays, and there's guys who make differences, and there's guys who win games.
But we saw that at Alabama from time to time. He wasn't asked to do it, but we saw it from time to time.
So.
All right. Okay.
I think he was in a situation that was really, and again, I've been completely consistent on Bryce Young.
I'm not
Nick Saban never said one crossword about this kid. Never one.
Never did.
Which tells you so much about him.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, like, he is what he is. I don't think he's magically going to turn into something that he's not. And I've said this all along, and I'll just explain it to you in the most simple of terms. And some people get confused when I use gender and race roles, but I'm just gonna give it to you. He has the traits. He has the typical traits of what we would consider to be a quote unquote white quarterback.
Yes.
He does not have the traits of what we would consider to be a quote unquote black quarterback.
We talked about it all the way through,
right? And I even
up to the draft.
I have said from day one that his comp is Drew Brees.
Mm-hmm.
That's his comp. So but to get to Drew Brees' level, remember when he played for the Chargers, he was good. Wasn't great.
Yeah.
To your point about Mahomes and winning Super Bowls, you got to get with the right coach. Is Frank Reich going to be the right coach? He could be.
Could be.
But I'm just saying to you, he is not a guy. He will not be the reason you win football games.
Was Drew Brees a guy who won football games?
A lot of times, no. Not at the end of his career?
At the end of his career. The guy's just starting his career.
At his height, sure. The height of his career. Not obviously, I'm not making a height,
which is fair too.
Joke
which is fair too when it comes to Drew Brees. I don't know.
Drew Brees has some dudes around him too. Don't forget.
Everybody needs dudes around him.
Absolutely.
Everybody needs
except
dudes
the Chiefs, apparently.
As they proved,
giving ones away.
As they proved,
Kelsey
as they proved you wrong. So